Okay.
Okay, so yeah.
Right on. Okie dokie. Hi, Nick. Hi, Futha. All right. Samu. Okay. All right, here we go. Sections 11, 12, and 13. And I haven't proposed any questions here. What I'm going to do is just read the selections that I have selected that I think are really important, tell you what I think it all means, and then you can just elaborate or contradict me or whatever you want to do. So this is a brief summary of where we have come from. Greek tragedy emerged from a synthesis of two opposing artistic impulses, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian is self-conscious awareness of individuality, desiring clarity, form, beauty, order, and rationality. Contrarily, the Dionysian is the loss of self-conscious awareness and immersion in the forces of unconstrained reality of nature. Chaos, intoxication, ecstasy expressed in music, dance, and communal rituals, emphasizing the dissolution of boundaries and the unity of all existence. Greek tragedy merges these impulses to reveal the profound existential and aesthetic tension between order and chaos, form and dissolution. Classical tragedy is the synthesis of the structured Apollonian world of Homeric epic poetry and the pain and contradiction of Archilochos' musically inspired lyric poetry, and finds its earliest expression in the chorus in the Dionysian dithyrambs. These rituals involved ecstatic dances, music, and communal celebrations that allowed the participants and their audience to experience the Dionysian intoxicated sense of unity with the natural world by means of Apollonian-inspired images and poetry. The chorus, with whom the spectator identifies, plays a central role in Greek tragedy, serving as a collective voice that comments on the action, expresses emotions, and participates in the performance of the play, enabling the audience to experience a catharsis of culturally restrained pity and terror, a remedy for the nausea experienced by exposure to the Dionysian reality. So here we go. You may remember that he commented on Euripides bringing an end to Greek tragedy. So what Nietzsche thinks of Greek tragedy is Aeschylus and Sophocles. Greek tragedy met an end different from that of her older sister arts. She died in consequence of an irreconcilable conflict. It was Euripides who fought this death struggle. The later artistic genre is known as New Attic Comedy. Euripides brought the spectator onto the stage. He who has perceived the material out of which the Promethean tragic writers prior to Euripides formed their heroes, and how remote from their purpose it was to bring the faithful mask of reality onto the stage, will also be aware of the utterly opposite tendency of Euripides. Through him, the everyday man forced his way from the spectator seats onto the stage. The mirror in which formerly only grand and bold traits were represented now showed the painful fidelity that conscientiously reproduces even the botched outlines of nature. The spectator now actually saw and heard his double on the Euripidean stage and rejoiced that he could talk so well. The passing moment, wit, levity, and caprice are its highest deities. The fifth estate, that of the slaves, now comes to power, at least in sentiment. And if we may still speak at all of Greek cheerfulness, it is the cheerfulness of the slave who has nothing of consequence to be responsible for, nothing great to strive for, and who does not value anything in the past or future higher than the present. So I think that's a pretty neat summation of the differences between the Prometheus that we read and the Alcestis, which we read, because the Alcestis is much more accessible. The Prometheus is not a character we can identify with. Io is not a character we can really identify with. The chorus, expressing the emotions, observing the torments of Prometheus, is replaced. And the whole construct of a mythical world is kind of just disassembled and replaced with what we recognize as like the drama we have today effectively. So that's what I think Nietzsche is effectively observing here and commenting on. Anybody got anything that they would like to add to that or embellish or just put up your virtual hand?
I don't have virtual hand today. Where is it? There it is. Hi.
There it is. Hi, James.
Yeah, this reminds me of part of it reminds me of Schopenhauer. He does get really wordy, and it's this idea of the feelings of the slave. The fifth state is the state of the slave, and also he mentions middle class mediocrity as kind of the other thing. In other words, the people on stage become like the audience. There's the other thing I read, right, which was just the other thing I read was just Prometheus Unbound or Prometheus Bound, and it was kind of there were I don't even know I don't even think there were any humans in it, right? So someone's mother was a human, maybe, that happened a lot. So there was this kind of there's this kind of like removal, right? You have the core. The only thing that could possibly represent the people is the chorus, and the chorus is kind of like chatty and dominant, and they sometimes they talk a lot, other times the characters get to give a speech. Now you have the sort of like the classes, and I get that Nietzsche really regrets this. It's like he doesn't have a place for human progress, and I think he's getting this from Schopenhauer. In other words, that it's kind of a waste if you try to change civilization. If you think you have a better idea, it's probably a worse idea. And so I find this kind of like that. He also mentions Aristophanes as a reason for him accusing Euripides. So there was that kind of like a double argument. Aristophanes did this. He wrote the Frog, and the frogs was kind of like a commentary, right, on what was happening in Greek drama and comedy and so forth, I suppose. So that was the idea, is that there was this parody called the Frogs, which was kind of like already out there. And then Nietzsche is kind of like riffing, I think, on that, saying that, like this is what became of drama because of Euripides, kind of sneaking in all the good stuff. In other words, the audience began to become the character, and resembles modern drama that way. And the character spoke perfectly, and it's like the improvement in language developed through Euripides. And he was even accused of being helped by Socrates. So that was kind of like so a lot of like interesting ideas come out through this, but it's hard to understand Nietzsche's attitude because it's so backwards looking.
Okay, I'm going to comment on that before I go to Jason. Just my own thoughts on what you were saying there. I think that Nietzsche has a high esteem for what he's considering the classic tragedies, that the audience effectively became the chorus and observed the torments of the god on the stage and wasn't a participant in the action itself or what was going on the stage. The audience was living the chorus's expression of grief and terror. Whereas in a Euripidean thing, this is changed because now instead of being an observer in the way the chorus is the observer, you are now a participant. The whole way you approach the drama is completely changed if you are not identifying and being part of the chorus's observation. Jason.
So are we on Aristophanes yet, or it's later?
No, we're not there. We're not
Okay,
there. I
James
just
jump ahead. So because James jump ahead. So question on your last comment on the after Euripides, right? The voice of chorus disappear, become so what does that mean? That means the regular people become less a spectator or become emerge in the drama.
In the Promethean style of tragedy, the audience is observing the torments of the god and reacting in the way the chorus is expressing their reality. The chorus is almost creating the reality on the stage. In fact, that's what it was before the first actor appeared. And so it's an emotional experience of being in the orchestra, not on the stage. You don't see yourself on the stage, you see the god on the stage. And the chorus laments and tries to understand what's happening, and you are in that space. You don't identify with somebody in a dramatic presentation. You observe, and that's, I think, what he's saying is the primary difference. The chorus actually moves onto the stage in Euripides and becomes almost a minor character instead of the replacement for the audience. That's in Alcestis is a good example of that. The chorus is a character. The chorus no longer is sitting in a separate space observing what's happening. They are now part of what's happening. And so that changes the aesthetics of what had been for Nietzsche classic tragedy. And I think that he has more esteem for that union of the Apollinian and Dionysian that is no longer the case. And that's where we'll get to with the next slide. Anybody else? Okay, moving on. Euripides undoubtedly felt himself as a poet superior to the masses in general, but to two of his spectators he did not feel superior. One is Euripides himself. Euripides as thinker, not as poet. As a spectator, with all the brightness and dexterity of his critical thinking, he observed in classical tragedy how dubious the solution of the ethical problems were, how questionable the treatment of the myths, how unequal the distribution of bad and good fortune. He confessed that he did not understand his great predecessors, and in this state of torment, he found that other spectator who did not comprehend tragedy and therefore did not esteem it. Allied with him, he could now begin the tremendous struggle against the art of Aeschylus and Sophocles as a dramatic poet who opposed his conception of tragedy to the traditional one. So I think that he's just kind of nailing down how Euripides arrived at moving the spectator onto the stage. Euripides, I think Nietzsche is sort of saying, just didn't understand how classic tragedy worked. He didn't like the way it functioned. He felt the sense of pity, terror, but he wanted to change the way it was. The next slide will develop this a little bit further. He had a whole different, a more thoughtful, constructive approach, which is more Apollinian, not a mix of Apollinian and Dionysian. And that he's beginning to push the Dionysian out of the way, the senselessness. These things disturbed him. It's like Prometheus has no real resolution. You just feel things while you're watching what's happening. There is no plot to speak of. And Euripides finds this, according to Nietzsche, offensive and thinks it's wrong-headed. James.
Yeah, I think there's a telling sentence in the text. I'm going to try to see. Well, I'll just read it from my translation. It's kind of, to me, he's talking about the frogs, which maybe I shouldn't say now, because maybe you've got a section on the frogs that's coming up.
I don't.
Okay. Anyway, so it's about that, and it's about the and it's this and the idea. It's about the whole idea, the whole approach to art and culture in general, and the idea that art determines culture. So, and here you have it. If now the entire crowd philosophized, watching Aristophanes or a play by Euripides, or the Euripides character in Frogs, he's talking about to a certain extent. If now the entire crowd philosophized, administered their lands and goods with tremendous astuteness, and carried on their own legal matters, well then, he claimed, that was to his credit and the achievement of the wisdom which he had drummed into the people. Now, I'm assuming this is not a letter that Euripides wrote to Nietzsche or someone else. I'm assuming that this, yeah. I'm assuming that this is Nietzsche's take on the attitude of the playwright, Euripides, in portraying the audience in that way, and giving the audience credit for the intelligence of the characters, giving the audience credit to understand, what a proper Greek or king or person of culture would do in a specific productive or legal situation. And this is Nietzsche's take. And this is one of the worst takes on art, I think, that you can possibly have. The idea that the artist leads and that the audience is just like suffering through the audience's view of what society is to become once they once they view the work of art or listen to the symphony or have digested the novels and so on and so forth. So I say that in other words, culturally, Nietzsche oversteps, and that's the flavor I get from the whole section.
Oversteps in what way, though? I'm a little confused, because when you mentioned Aristophanes, I thought you were talking about Nietzsche's view of what Aristophanes was saying about Euripides. So where does Nietzsche?
Well, he's blending them together, and I haven't read the Frogs, so I don't know except everything, but it's a comedy, right? So it's the idea of like shrewdness and cunning. It goes on to say and so forth. And Euripides is the leader of the chorus, and this is kind of the yeah, you're right. This is the idea in Frogs. This is not Euripides himself. So he's taking that idea from Frogs that Euripides is the leader of the chorus. He's incessantly praised, and people would have let themselves be killed in order to learn more from him if they'd not been aware that tragic poets were just as dead as tragedy itself. That's very clever of Nietzsche, right? Very clever sentence. So, but the idea is that this view of, and this view is coming, I agree, this is coming from Aristophanes. It's not necessarily coming directly from Nietzsche. But the idea here is from Aristophanes, I think, is kind of like the bad take on culture. The idea that culture is shaped either by kings, who design the wars and laws and things like that, or that the culture is being shaped by these upstart artists that are even impious enough to cancel out some of the religious themes in the old tragedy. And is it the death of tragedy? Maybe it is. But is it the death of drama? Is it the death of enjoyment? Is it the death of cultural strivings? Probably not.
No, well, I would agree with you. I don't think Nietzsche is saying that that's what it is, though. I just think he's saying it's the death of the tragic experience, the union of these two impulses in a kind of purity. It's the end of that. And I think that he laments that somewhat. Yeah, okay. Jason.
So the book title is The Birth of Tragedy. So sounds here in the chapter, section 11 is the death of tragedy, right? So, and then kind of my observation, or I just like to verify. So sounds like the comedy, it's the death of tragedy and the birth of comedy. Am I right? Because the
Comedy.
comedy
Sort of,
developed after tragedy, right?
I'm going to go with that. What turned up on the stage after tragedy was no longer being performed was comedy. It's not that there weren't plays that had tragic elements, and we'll get into a little bit of what Euripides was doing with that. He changed the nature of how the spectator experiences the event.
So
And
after he changed the,
well, that opened the door to the kind of comedy.
oh, okay. So the death of the so-called good tragedy then opened the door for the new comedy. That's he's talking about.
That's what he's saying. Yeah,
Okay,
I don't
great.
know. And
I agree because I don't have much knowledge about this, so I have to agree with Nietzsche all the way. So
yeah. I kind of take his word for it too, because I don't know enough of that history. And he was a classical philologist, and he knew his Greek and all that stuff, and esteemed the Greeks really highly. And that's coming up. And toward the end, he's got just a lovely piece on the way I feel about the Greeks and the way I've talked to you guys about the Greeks. But right now, we're just at this point where he's trying to describe how how and why Euripides did what he did and offered a vision that was more encompassing and embraced far more people in terms of dramatic participation, rather than a more immersive, religiously toned observation of tragedy in the theater. There was a deeper emotional connection between the chorus as the observer and the spectator than Euripides liked, and Euripides was able to change it, because it's just like a lot of people thought, real tragedy is very hard to, you wouldn't want a steady diet of it, let's put it that way. And so if you open the door to more traditional drama, and I think what he's going to say at some point is that Euripides virtually created the dramatic play, not the tragic play, but the dramatic play. And so this is drama writ the way we see it today. And Euripides is the vehicle that makes that possible. Because remember, there were no other kinds of stage performances. Classic Greek tragedy was the very beginning of drama on the stage. It wasn't occurring anywhere else in the world. And so that's the modification is what we are beneficiaries of today. Right? Yeah. Yeah, Jason, your hands up.
Yeah, I question to James. Okay, I heard you said the artist is leading the crowd. You say it's not good in your opinion or in Nietzsche's opinion?
Yeah, in my opinion, that's an elitist concept by
So
itself.
it's
You know, the
so-
idea that I'm writing a book and those peons that read my book and everyone beneath them are just going to have to catch up now. Like nobody writes a book like that. You know, they even like look at Shakespeare. You know, he's just interested in getting people off the street into the theater, and he didn't care that there were going to be both royals and idiots, you know, in the same room together. So it's kind of like it was this the true art is always understanding that the sound has to occur. You have to write it down. You have to get it out, and if the people come, then maybe you get rich. And if it's good, you know, people are going to talk about it for maybe longer than a season or maybe longer than a year if it's really that good.
okay, so that's
And when
your
we're
view.
talking about in this book, and I give Nietzsche a lot of credit for teaching us so much about Greek tragedy. But in this book, we're learning all these facts about the great Greek dramas as they kind of like arrived on the stage. At least the ones we know about. Some of these were lost. We lost some of the Aeschylus stuff, and who knows what else. So we can't really talk about the details of everything. I'd love to find out exactly what we have an idea what happened to Prometheus, but it'd be fun to have the text, you know, and say, oh, okay, oh, look what Prometheus did, you know.
Yeah.
Once he was no longer attached to the rocket.
It's interesting because the prediction that Aeschylus makes in Prometheus Bound was realized by the time he finished the trilogy, and it's not reflected in actual Greek mythology. Zeus was not. There was no twilight of the gods in Greek mythology at all, and yet this was where he was going, but it hasn't survived, and whatever as time passed. Okay. Okay, so that's the end of section 11. Yeah. So section 12, let us recall the discordant and incommensurable elements in the nature of Aeschylean tragedy. Our surprise at the chorus and the tragic hero, neither of which we can reconcile with our own customs or tradition, till we rediscover this duality as the origin and essence of Greek tragedy, the expression of two interwoven artistic impulses, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. To separate this original and all-powerful Dionysian element from tragedy, and to reconstruct tragedy purely on the basis of an un-Dionysian art, morality, and worldview, this is the tendency of Euripides as it now reveals itself to us in clear illumination. But even Euripides was only a mask. The deity that spoke through him was neither Dionysus nor Apollo, but an altogether newborn demon called Socrates. This is the new opposition, the Dionysian and the Socratic, and the art of Greek tragedy was wrecked on this. So this is really an introduction to the rest of what he's going to try to say along the way. But when I did a Wikipedia thing on Euripides, they do actually mention in there that Socrates and Euripides actually did work together. They were contemporaries. And so what he's asserting here later on is based in some sort of fact somewhere along the line, because I think that Wikipedia is never wrong. Okay, I don't really think that, but if it's there, it's now sort of the standard history in a lot of its own ways. So what he's introducing here is the Socratic element, and this will be developed on the next slide. So, but I thought this was just an important point to make. He's recapitulating the notion of what classic tragedy was for him. It doesn't have to make sense. Prometheus is not a sensible, this happens, then that happens, then this other thing happens. It's not like that at all. Alcestis is very much like that. It has a plot, it has development. And so this is just a passage to remind us of what he thinks the classic tragedy is. And Jason. So Jason.
Yeah, I like this one for some reason. Probably I have some Dionysian blood in myself. So for some reason, I like Socrates. I enjoy reading Plato. But whenever I see somebody condemn Socrates, I got excited. So I really like this part. And then I remember when I think we read together during the pandemic, read the Crowd, right? Aristophanes make fun of the Socrates, and that's a really fun reading to me. Okay, even I like Socrates a lot, his philosophy. Yeah. So all this one, my learning is start from Homer's, that's heroic epic poetry. Then we develop the tragedy, and the tragedy become Euripides kind of tragedy. Then give a new comedy. Okay, that's Aristophanes kind of comedy. And then probably we can say get worse. That's a Platonic dialogue. So become a philosophical moral teaching, that's put this way. So the dynamic is all gone, right? From the tragedy, okay? And then become comedy. And then even worse, let's put this worse, okay? Platonic dialogue. And we all know when you read Platonic dialogue, it's much more easy to fall asleep than reading the tragedy, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just diverting from that sort of thing. Were you finished, Jason?
Yeah, that's what I need to say. Yeah.
Okay. Plato condemned the poets, and yet he was doing a form of poetic art himself. And it's sort of a curious thing that he would have done that. And he truly believed that he was shaping the way the world is. I'm sort of where I think you were saying, James. I think that art validates the world in a lot of ways and makes culture what it is for all practical purposes. It's not like it makes sense of the world when it's otherwise senseless. So that's what I think the role of art is in our lives, James.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Lindsay. Yeah, so I think this I was just going to mention. I think what Euripides is doing in Alcestis is a lot of it is parody, and that's what came out. That's basically what Aristophanes, I think, was doing, was a lot of parodying, and Jason was just reminding us about that. And so that's basically, that was a tendency, I believe, that began with Euripides, because he's basically bringing out you have a death what do you call it, not an omen, a fate, a death fate, and it has to be it can be exchanged. The king is allowed to exchange it with another person, and finally passes it on to his wife, takes it, and Alcestis, and everybody's very sad, very solemn, and it's fairly tragic. But this one guy, who's an old friend, Heracles, is like not is sort of like kept out of the loop a little bit, but he's invited to stay because of his status, right? His stature, and he's invited to stay in the back room kind of idea. And he gets drunk as a skunk. And it's, you know, it's a funny scene. But kind of like outrage, there's outrage, right? The slave is outraged. Heracles is comes out and he's drunk as a skunk, but he kind of makes a little bit of sense, even though he's in that condition. And then finally, and then gets the whole truth, right, out of the king. So and he says, well, I have some dealings with these people or these gods. I've had some dealings with these types before. Why don't I go see what I might be able to negotiate? But of course, Heracles is a ruffian and he's drunk as a skunk. So you know that you don't think he's going to do anything like that. And of course, there's paintings, there's famous paintings of Heracles and Hades having it out with each other, you know, with hands on each other. So this is kind of what would you call this? This play, even though it's very light in parts of it, and a parody, it's also very reason I say that's a parody is because this is a little hit, I think, on Dionysus, right? If somebody can get drunk in the play and act inappropriately, that's kind of Dionysian. So I just think that's kind of like a parodical element. So yeah. So that's and I can't say there's any of these plays I really hate, but I recognize the quality in Euripides, and obviously he's going for quality. It's not a terrible thing, and so that's why I feel like Nietzsche is so over the top. But at the same time, in presenting his kind of reaction, almost condemning the change in Greek culture, that was the transformation in Greek culture that was occurring. And this was a kind of like a secularization, right? A movement away from the religious dogma on stage to, well, we can write a play about anything we like. So, and it can even be a tragedy about ordinary people, kings and Hercules and stuff like that. But so it's kind of like, so there's a transition stage. And so that's all. I just I recommend that I mean I just respect the artistry in Euripides' work, and Nietzsche describes it. He does do a fairly good job describing it, and he also introduces the parodical element in Aristophanes, and I think that applies to Euripides as well. That was the introduction of not just comedy, which exists in Aeschylus, but comedy, but parody in the character of Heracles.
Yeah, I still don't understand what you think Nietzsche is doing that's over the top.
Well, he seems to feel like if he feels like it's very emotional. The writing is so emotional. That's what seems over the top to me, is that it's a kind of like a purposeful wrecking or creating a new tragedy of the destruction of the Dionysian fusion, if you will. Not that the Dionysian fusion in Greek culture wasn't ingenious. I totally respect that. It's just that there's a time when these things have to be put aside. And I think Euripides was maybe one of the first persons to come along and say and realize that oh, we could have a more secular type of tragedy, couldn't we? That's all. That's my point.
Okay, I'm not, still don't know quite what's supposed to be over the top about that. What I see here is just that Nietzsche has a preference or a longing for the classic tragic form of art because of what it represented to him. Got keeping in mind he's 28 years old when he writes this. So he's still a young man and he's full of energy and all the rest of it. And he's, like I was saying earlier, this is his lament for what he, and I think lots of other people consider the high art of Aeschylean, Sophoclean tragedy, that it cannot be recovered anymore. And I think that Nietzsche sort of feels sad about that. Jason.
So at the beginning of the section 12, right, Nietzsche start to mention about the, how to pronounce Bacchae? Bacchae? Okay. Is that right pronunciation?
Okay.
Bacchae. Bacchae.
Yeah.
Okay. So talk about Bacchae. And we read this one. We're lucky. We read that one. Yeah, during the pandemic. It's I don't know, not so good in my opinion. So so here seems talking about Nietzsche, about Euripides try to resurrect Dionysian, but failed. That's what Nietzsche talk about.
He's saying, he's claiming that Euripides wanted to completely eliminate the Dionysian element, the essence of intoxication, the abandonment of oneness, the celebration of unity, the contradiction and pain and ugliness that come with the raw nature. He wanted to get rid of that, but that is a fundamental part of being alive and having a culture at all, and he was unable to completely crush it.
So what's the reason Euripides created Bacchae?
The Bacchae.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the reason? Does Nietzsche say that? Why he, because Bacchae, the story of Bacchae is the Dionysus, right, go to there and then doing something, then turn out they kill the king, the Pentheus, okay, and this kind of tragedy. So what's the reason of making this story?
Because he's showing that even in the Bacchae, Pentheus is the king, right? And he is telling Dionysus, who's disguised as some character, I can't be persuaded by all of this. That I'm too smart. I can figure this all out. In the end, he's torn to pieces. He does become a participant in the whole thing against his own better judgment, because it's all about getting drunk and revelry, and you're out in the woods and you're in the midst of nature, and all these women are whirling around it, and they tear to pieces, as just the same way as Dionysus presumptively was torn to pieces in one of the legends. And so Dionysus is sort of getting even. So he's using that illustration as just a reference point in Euripides' writing, that even in his attempt directly to eliminate Dionysus as a power, he didn't. In the end, he had to write it as a real thing, and that's why Pentheus just succumbs to the state, the Dionysian state, at the ritual festival that he thinks he's going to fool everybody by attending. He's just expressing that even Euripides finally had to recognize Dionysus as a force of nature, as a force. Okay. James.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Now I've got to read that. And I was just commenting on the Heracles character. My take on Alcestis. The Heracles character seems to me to be he's playing against Admetus, who is kind of the central character, and Heracles is the kind of like the guy who is using reason from drunkenness, trying to figure out what is going on. you know. So it's kind of like a combination. Maybe it's this parody, right, of the Apollonian Dionysian that we're kind of looking for. That's all I'm saying, is that Hercules'
Okay.
character seems so parodic to me that it is probably based on perhaps Dionysus and maybe both, right? The Apollonian Dionysian character.
The end of chapter 10, he calls Euripides sacrilegious Euripides. And I think that says all you need to know about that. Nick.
Yeah, what is jumping out for me in this section is the idea that with Euripides and collaboration with Socrates, he says here that the beautiful is there are two passages. To be beautiful, everything must be intelligible.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
There's-
That's the next slide. That's the
Oh.
next slide. Want to save it for that? Let's
Yeah,
do the next.
I'll save it for that. I'll save it for
Okay.
that.
All right. Okay, what form of drama still remained if it was not to be born of the womb of music in the mysterious twilight of the Dionysian? Only the dramatized epos. But in this Apollonian domain of art, the tragic effect is certainly unattainable. The poet of the dramatized epos cannot blend completely with his images any more than the epic rhapsodist can. He is still that calm, unmoved contemplation which sees the images before its wide open eyes. Here, we no longer remark anything of the epic absorption in mere appearance or of the dispassionate coolness of the true actor, who precisely in his highest activity is wholly mere appearance and joy in mere appearance. Euripides is the actor whose heart beats, whose hair stands on end. As Socratic thinker, he designs the plan. As passionate actor, he executes it. It has alienated itself as much as possible from the Dionysian elements. It requires new stimulants, which no longer lie within the sphere of the only two art impulses, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. These stimulants are cool, paradoxical thoughts, replacing Apollonian contemplation, and fiery effects, replacing Dionysian ecstasies. Thoughts and affects copied very realistically and in no sense dipped into the ether of art. I may have, I wasn't sure which slide was coming up next, but go ahead, Nick, say what you were saying. I don't know if I don't think it relates to that necessarily.
Oh, well, I mean, I'll just paraphrase. There's a passage when it talks about the Dionysian tragedy as having, where its emphasis is pathos, that there is always that the pathos is the key thing, not the plot, but pathos coming out from, I take it as a way of relating in an emotional way, if you will. And the thing that also is brought about with the Socratic style that Euripides adopts is the idea that to be beautiful, everything must be conscious. Only the conscious can be beautiful. Only the things that are obvious, let's say, or in a way that what the intellect can comprehend is a thing that is beautiful, that is laid out there. And the idea, I think it subsumes the idea of pathos, that the thing that is more unexplainable, emotional, that is part of what is can be displayed in art, in theater. So that's the big difference that I'm seeing here. Of course, there's also what, as James pointed out, seems to be kind of Nietzsche's elitists look like, the day-to-day mundane stuff that people are concerned about is maybe not worthy of drama. and it has to be kind of a grand scale about myths, about great concepts that are representative by the gods, by the conflict of the gods. But the day-to-day stuff that we all deal with is well, it's mundane, and it's kind of like bringing in not the high part of humanity, but maybe even what you might think of the dregs. Anyway, I think that is totally well, for our day, we definitely frown on that because we appreciate the day-to-day that more, and all that.
Yeah, well, we certainly are. I think one of the things I think that Nietzsche has difficulties with is just trying to, and I may even have it wrong about the feeling that an ancient Greek spectator in the theater at Athens observing or being part of the Dionysian dithyramb would actually feel. And I think that Nietzsche is trying to get at that in a lot of ways and describe that sort of feeling. I don't think that he's dumping on Euripides as a dramatist. He's lamenting that the tragic art form died with him, and that the whole means of experiencing tragedy as a reflection of life itself is lost. That Euripidean drama comedy is not life itself. It's now a play. And the contradictions are not explored, or they're rationalized away. That was the wrong slide, not the wrong slide, but I think you might be in chapter 13 or section 13. Jason.
Okay, so what's Nietzsche's point on the rhapsodist? Okay, he quote from Ion, right? Ion is talking about
Play that.
rhapsodist described. Okay, so I remember Socrates Greek. What? Ion is breaking. He know since he memorized everything Homer said. And what Homer said is all the knowledge, right? And then Ion is able to recite everything. So he claimed that's all the knowledge he has. So what's Nietzsche's point here? He's talking about that's the problem, or
Yeah, I think what he's trying to get at, I mean, this seems to me to be a pretty nuanced point in a lot of ways, but I think that what he's trying to say is that the actor I don't think I can quite describe that. The actor in like a modern drama is not actually experiencing. He's crying because what he is reciting is a sad thing. He's not, and there's an artifice in that rather than a deep personal experience of crying, which is what you would experience in a classic tragedy in an actor on the stage. That thing, I'm a little confused about mere appearance and the joy of mere appearance for the part of the actor, let's say, who was playing Prometheus.
yeah, because he used the meal. Let me a little bit confused. I'm not sure what's Nietzsche's attitude.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear on that too. Obviously, I'm trying to explain here, and I can't. Okay, Nick.
Yeah, I'm in my mind, I'm seeing a parallel of Nietzsche's complaint with maybe what might have happened in Shakespeare's day before the Shakespearean plays came about. That genre. What was most popular then were I forget the real name for it, that mystery plays, if you will. These are religious plays that were performed in cities and towns, and people gravitated to them. And they always had a religious theme. And it always was, I think, quite moralizing, if you will. Shakespeare changed all of that when he entered and put in the day-to-day and the nuance and the interesting stuff. I think it became richer because of that, even if it was more mundane. But somebody, I'm thinking that Nietzsche is playing the part of somebody who's kind of sorry to see these things go, this tragedy that were moral statements that had very high levels of, I don't know, virtue, stories and tales for in exchange for this day-to-day stuff. But I think maybe that might be unfair, but it's a
No, I
thing that
think,
popped into my head. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that, like I said earlier, the best way I can kind of capture what I think Nietzsche is a lament that what tragic art could do, Aeschylus, Sophocles, nobody can write that anymore because the chorus is no longer what it was back in those days. There's no way to capture that interaction between the spectator, the audience, and the chorus as their representative observing this other space where the God was. And I think he thinks that this was a really important artistic phenomenon that he esteems for its ability, and this is going back a few chapters, a few sections, for its ability to counteract without denying the nausea that you feel when you look around and realize how artificial so much of your life actually is, that nature is, that it's been constructed. It's not the real thing. We're all obeying rules and doing this and doing that. And we're only doing it, you know, because we think this is the cultural edifice that we live in. Well, it is that too, but the reality at the bottom, and that's why things always get screwed up, is because there's a reality underneath. And if you finally face that fact without the protection of art to release those emotions, you'll kill yourself because the wisdom of Dionysus is too powerful. And so I think that's why he's holding this up. This fascination with life itself for its own sake and the things that drive life. This is a very important theme in a lot of the rest of Nietzsche's writings. So that's why I've been kind of going on about this, capture that thought.
James, I know James has something to say, but can I just respond to what you just said? So just quickly, I think for me again, just to qualify what I said also is that I think the big thing that maybe Nietzsche laments is the loss of pathos. That pathos that can touch us, that is not in a conscious level, which tragedy could. And now you have this rather interesting stuff with Euripides, but it's all at the level of consciousness, and it all makes sense and so forth. But that thing that is unconscious, the pathos, that is the big thing that maybe can be, be tragic to have lost, I guess would be one.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would agree with you, James.
I just wanted to mention, yeah, that's good. Those are really good points. I wanted to mention that the later on in this section, he seems to be taking, he seems to be making statements about the logic and that Euripides introduces, and we talk about what Nietzsche is talking about it kind of negatively, but here it comes through as kind of like, well, this is kind of the way things are in modern movies. I used to be married, and my partner used to figure out what was happening in almost every movie she watched. If it was a drama at all, like if there was gonna if there were characters that were kind of like usually there's characters that are trying to prevent something terrible, right, from occurring or something like that. And she could always figure out what was behind the what was behind the door, how it was going to end, what the purpose of the plot was, and she had like it's like her mind was racing right through every plot, right? And that's kind of what he's taking Euripides apart for, is introducing that style. The idea that he says what we habitually assess so frequently in Euripides as a poetical deficiency and a backward step in comparison with Sophoclean tragedy is for the most part the product of that emphatic critical process, that daring intelligence. Let the Euripidean prologue serve for us as an example of what the rationalistic method produces. Nothing can be more offensive to our stage techniques than the prologue in a Euripidean play. That a single person should step forward at the beginning of a work and explain who he is, what has gone on before the action starts, what has happened up to this point, and indeed, what will occur in the unfolding of the work. That would strike a modern poetical dramatist as a wanton, inexcusable abandonment of the effect of suspense. And he's talking about the chorus, I think, in Euripides. Maybe there is a character that steps up with a name, but
Talking about Apollo or something. God comes on right in the beginning and tells the whole plot. And
but he
then
doesn't tell. But he doesn't tell the plot. He tells what happened and gives a hint as to what the moral concerns that are coming up. In other words, the king has to die or something like that, you know, and the king is condemned, is cursed. So there's this but anyway, to me it reminds me, right, of my ex who could always figure out what was behind the door. It's just like she would be like listening to everything, listening to everybody, and she had already figured out what the script writers knew.
Yeah, I've met people like that too. Yeah. Jason.
Yeah, the question about drama or play, right? So in today's movie, the director make the movie, he only expect the audience only watch once, right? That's my first time watch and finish. I'm not going. So does in the Greek time and the Shakespeare's play, is that expect people to only watch once, like we are doing, or they expect people to watch many times?
Yeah, these were one-offs. These were one-offs. The tragedies were one-offs. Yeah.
Yeah, because
And
sometimes you'd have to go to Mount Olympus to watch the play. That's where a lot of the play contests where the plays were given.
Okay, so only write and the play once, then it's done, right?
Yeah, not necessarily in Athens, but up the mountain.
okay, I think I've only got one slide left, but I think it's the most important one of this thing. Oh, this is what Nick was just talking about earlier. I'm actually going to read, because we're running a little bit late here, both this and the next one, because that'll be section 13, because I want to get through all of this now. So now we should be able to come closer to the character of aesthetic Socratism, whose supreme law reads roughly as follows: to be beautiful, everything must be intelligible, where Socrates' knowledge is virtue. With this canon, Euripides measured all the separate elements of the drama, language, characters, dramaturgic structure, and choric music, and corrected them according to this principle. Critical process, this audacious reasonableness. He must have felt as if he'd bring to life for drama the beginning of the essay of Anaxagoras. In the beginning, all things were mixed together. Then came the understanding and created order. Euripides undertook to show to the world the reverse of the classic, tragic, unintelligent poet. His aesthetic principle that to be beautiful, everything must be conscious, is the parallel to the Socratic to be good, everything must be conscious. So this is the last. I'm just going to wrap this up and then we can just finish the discussion. The most acute word, however, about this new and unprecedented value set on knowledge and insight was spoken by Socrates when he found that he was the only one who acknowledged to himself that he knew nothing, whereas he had called on the greatest statesmen, orators, poets, and artists, and had everywhere discovered the conceit of knowledge. To his astonishment, he perceived that all these celebrities were without a proper and sure insight, even with regard to their own professions, and that they practiced them only by instinct. Only by instinct. With this phrase, we touch upon the heart and core of the Socratic tendency. With it, Socratism condemns existing art as well as existing ethics. Wherever Socratism turns its searching eyes, it sees the lack of insight and the power of illusion. And from this lack, it infers the essential perversity and reprehensibility of what exists. Basing himself on this point, Socrates conceives it to be his duty to correct existence, all alone with the expression of irreverence and superiority as the precursor of an altogether different culture, art, and morality. He enters a world to touch whose very hem would give us the greatest happiness. In this utterly abnormal nature, instinctive wisdom appears only in order to hinder conscious knowledge occasionally, while in all productive men it is instinct, that is, the creative affirmative force, and consciousness acts critically and dissuasively. In Socrates, it is instinct that becomes the critic, and consciousness becomes the creator. He went to his death with the calm with which he leaves the symposium at dawn, the last of the revelers, to begin a new day, while on the benches and on the earth his drowsy table companions remain behind to dream of Socrates, the true eroticist. The dying Socrates became the new ideal, never seen before, of noble Greek youth. Above all, the typical Hellenic youth, Plato, prostrated himself before this image with all the ardent devotion of his enthusiastic soul. All of a sudden, we're not in the world of tragedy anymore, right? We are now moving into the philosophical realm, and we're getting an eyeful of some really interesting criticism and commentary of Socrates and Plato. Jason.
Yeah, that's the last sentence. Actually, that's what I mean. So after that is the birth of Platonic dialogue. So after we already see the birth of tragedy, the birth of comedy, then right now is the birth of the Platonic dialogue, and then we keep the the dialectic form for philosophical, for a long time. Here are the question at the beginning of the chapter 13. Talking about the Socrates is the wisest person, and Euripides is the second, and who is the third one? Aeschylus, right? Sophocles is the third. Yeah, is that's what Nietzsche said, or that's somebody said?
I think it's somebody else. That was and there was like a poll taken, I guess, in Athens or something, and that was the vote. These were, I don't know that this actually happened, but I'm going to suppose that maybe it did. And
okay, so that's my first time I heard it, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, but as a classical scholar, I sort of trust him to be on the level with that. But so this is what I think he's just getting at here with this whole approach to Socrates is that suddenly the world that exists, the conventions that exist, ought to be challenged and examined. Like the unexamined life is not worth living. That's another thing that Socrates said. So we're being introduced to philosophy now, and he's kind of done with tragedy. I think 14 and 15 developed these themes a little more thoroughly. So now we're finally moving into some genuine philosophical considerations about these two guys. And the one of the lingering questions is, what did he really think of Socrates, one way or the other? And maybe you can suck some of that out of the remaining text. And But if you do, bring the text along so that we can all listen to it. James.
Yeah, I think what he's saying here is that the question is, right? The question that he's posing is, do you lead with consciousness or intelligence, if you will, or do you lead with instinct? In other words, do you basically solve the problem, or do you react to the problem first? So if you react to the problem, then you have consciousness, which can kind of come in and save the day if it needs to, kind of thing. And if you use consciousness first, that everything is kind of cut and dried, and the only thing instinct can do, there's a question, because there's a big question mark there, is that basically what is left for the instinct? Is the instinct only for food, and is it only for food and argument and sex? Is it just is everything just limited to the desires for instinct, or do we just generally is there a place where we can recognize instinct first? And of course that is something that Nietzsche says that Socrates left no room for. That, in other words, oh, they want to kill me. They say they want to try me for treason or whatever it is, and I'm going to have to drink hemlock. And boy, that'll be great, won't it? It's kind of like it's like getting up in the morning, to go home, right? He would get up from the Lyceum or wherever it was and take off for home, and leave people sleeping there in the park who had been listening and arguing with him. So it was kind of like just another day, right? That Nietzsche says.
No.
And in a way, that's kind of like, in a way that might be true. In other words, is there a role for this kind of perfect coolness? And was kind of like a world, is that the final stroke of the old world against the old world? The Greek happiness, serenity, was the gift finally destroyed by Socrates when he departed in perfect coolness?
Good thought, Jason.
Okay, so can we go back to the section 12, the very end, right? It's a little bit confusing here. He talk about Orpheus. So here, after talking about ascetic Socratism was the murderous principle, right? Then he talk about he is the, I think he means means Socrates, right? We may recognize in Socrates the opponent of Dionysus. He's the new Orpheus who rose against Dionysus. How I just don't see the Orpheus play here. I consider Orpheus is represent the mystical court, right? So I don't know, it's that.
Yeah. I cannot help you there. I'm not
Okay,
familiar
anyway.
with Orpheus mythology at all. Nick.
Yeah, me too. I'm drawing a blank, Jason. Stop asking those hard questions.
Where's quietly? No, go ahead.
What James is saying about instinct, where it comes in when you have somebody like as intellectual and rational as Socrates, is the interesting thing that was put in this section we were reading. Is the daemon, right? Which is kind of an ironic statement in that the daemon in Socrates was the instinctual part that would give him a non-rational halt or warning, if you will. And it didn't have to do with reason at all, but pure instinct. And he would be guided by that. That was one of his the main things. And that was, I guess, in a way, ironic. Anyway, I thought that was worth bringing up.
Yeah, no, it was. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
Which
Okay.
character was that? Who was that? That would give the
The daemon
instinctual.
here in the book, in my book, it's called daemonon. In general, it's daemon. You know, daemon.
Oh, okay.
The daemon of
The Oracle, maybe.
Socrates.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an oracle. It's kind of like a some
Conscience.
guardian angel, if you will, in Christian terms, watching over and giving warning, would only come up with, and Socrates would bring this up many times through Plato, that the daemon is,
Right.
is one of the guiding forces that Socrates listened to.
Yeah.
With Socrates, you didn't need the Oracle anymore. It was kind of like, just, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk to me? We'll figure it out.
Right. It was something like that. Okay, so the next time we're going to do 14 and 15. And then the week after that, we're going to do the preface. The preface is filled with observations from 16 years later on this book, and a lot of philosophical other stuff. He had matured considerably in 16 years. And so you get a little preview of where we're going when we get to some of the other books along the way. So that's how it's going to be, 15 next time, and then we're done with the Birth of Tragedy. We're going to skip the whole thing about Wagner. Yeah, Nick.
Oh yeah, I was wondering what the 16 going to the end was all about. Was it all about Wagner at that point, or?
It's mostly about Wagner and how Wagner is going to read the spirit of tragedy through music. The whole music argument is he was very close to Wagner at the time. And the book is dedicated to Richard Wagner. And so from 16 on, it's just praising Wagner's gifts, and the notion of the operas he was building were tragedy and tragic in spirit, and he was, certainly his music. If I don't think anybody, well, this is an exaggeration, obviously. I think a lot of people, if they just listen to the opening 1 minute of Siegfried's Death March, they're going to cry. You don't even need to know that it's Siegfried's Death March. Just the music itself is going to make you feel so sad. And Wagner was an expert at this kind of understanding of what music communicated. And Nietzsche, that's partly how he got this whole idea. The book was not co-written, but with the cooperation and involvement at some level of Wagner. And so the whole last part of it is just like, Wagner's the greatest ever. And eventually they broke up like 3 or 4 years later. Major parting of the ways, and a major moment in his life philosophically, because he had devoted so much of himself to Wagner and Chopin.
He was taking music lessons and the whole bit.
Oh, he was a pianist himself. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So it was not for nothing that he was talking about music, but we'll kind of wrap. When we do talk about the preface, we'll kind of, I would like to hear your opinions of the whole thing now that we're kind of toward the end of it. Or we might just do it next week, depending on how long it takes to get through 14 and 15. Full speed ahead, people. All right.
Thanks a lot.
So I'll be posting it later.
Thank you.